Welcome back, fellow students of Bible prophecy. We're up to session 6 now out of the 6 that we assigned to the topic of giants, Genesis, and genetics. Today we take our biggest look yet at ancient records of giant remains, but this is by no means exhaustive. We also look at the question of whether modern human genetics are too far degraded from the genetics of human beings shortly after Adam and Eve, that aliens cannot hope to repeat the impressive hybridizations of the past. We visit the great vision of Daniel 2 and the angelic claims made in relation to the clay mixed with iron in the toes of that great statue. In setting out, we investigate a claim that voices have been heard underground in a cavern in the Euphrates Valley, and this valley and the cavern are apparently being guarded by a shining orb that sometimes appears in the sky, an angel perhaps above the valley. Now, what is interesting about this account is that the book of Revelations speaks in chapter 9, verse 14, of the 4 angels bound in the Euphrates and of their release at the 6th apocalyptic trumpet. It is these angels that bring the last great cull of mankind before the disasters of the 7 last vials and Judgment Day appear. They are the last of the great warning judgments. They kill mankind everywhere. That's the meaning in the Revelation text of 1/3 of men, by means of fire, smoke, and sulfur, which sounds very much like artillery and missile attack, or perhaps even nuclear war. So it sounds like we are looking at a situation of global war. So let's just read the passage from the book of Revelation. Here's a map and what look like seals along the river Euphrates, locks. Now, a voice, I'm cutting out a little bit of the text here to keep it shorter. A voice from the horns of the golden altar said to the 6th angel who had the trumpet, "Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." And the 4 angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill 1/3 of mankind. Clearly these angels are not our friends. Once they are released, the wars they unleash cannot be stopped or reversed. These are definitely angels of death and destruction, not the kind sort that we like to think of as protecting us. Now, another interesting Christian character who's still alive, who can speak of his encounters with angels that are alive but chained up today, is Henry Gruver, whose ministry took him into contact with other large angels, which in this case were bound up under the streets of Rome. I encourage you to take time to listen to some of Henry Gruver's stories, again available on YouTube. That's Gruver, G-R-U-V-E-R. Now, the book of Enoch, either you can call it Enoch 18 or 1 Enoch 18, and chapter 19 also explains that fallen angels were imprisoned in various places around the world. Apparently Rome is one of those additional places. Now, another group of those angels who led that original rebellion in Genesis 6 appear, as we've mentioned before, to be bound deep within Mount Vinson in Antarctica, if the identification of this mountain from Enoch 18 is correct. Now, we've mentioned this also in a previous study, but for those who have missed that, I think we'll just take the time to play the video again where it's discussed. And it comes from the Israeli News YouTube channel, and it's about 19 minutes in length if we watch the whole video, and we might as well do that. So we'll just take the time now to watch this video entitled "The Fallen Angels Imprisoned in Antarctica and Are Still Alive."
a once tropical paradise. Antarctica is now covered by a massive ice sheet spanning 98% of its surface. Since it had been rediscovered in 1911, this southernmost landmass became a subject of intrigue worldwide, with world superpowers showing an unprecedented desire to preserve this desolate land. 1 year after the Chinese detailed mapping of the region in 2005, NASA scientists announced their satellites had detected a huge electromagnetic anomaly buried beneath the frozen coat of ice. Preserved under the Wilkes Land Antarctic region, the gravity anomaly, as it has been dubbed, stretches for about 151 miles beneath the ice and has a depth of about 2,800 feet. So far, the best scientific hypothesis that has been put forward is that a colossal object, most probably a meteorite twice the size as the one that had wiped the dinosaurs millions of years ago, is sitting in the middle of a 300 miles wide impact crater. This is to say, a bold and hard to prove idea, yet it's enough to comfort those seeking the best scientific explanation. For those of you not relying on NASA for a straight answer, we have a different story to tell. A meaningful story that had been kept away from us for thousands and thousands of years. Here's what they don't want us to know. This year, on March 14, an intricate article was published by Israeli News Live entitled "The Fallen Angels Imprisoned in Antarctica and Are Still Alive." Commentator Steve Ben-Nun shared some intriguing passages from the Forbidden Book of Enoch, which, believe it or not, subtly refers to Antarctica as the land where the fallen angels had been imprisoned by God in remote times.
Something that I discovered recently written in the book of Enoch, and we're going to even be looking at some articles that have been considered, well, some might say it's fake news, some might say it's satire. Regardless of the case, there may be some very truth to it, and this is why I wanted to talk to you about these things. Antarctica has really become a major subject in recent, well, in fact, in the last year, even more so. There's been every kind of conspiracy theory that it is a place for a massive alien base. This is where aliens go at. We know of the one of the former military officers, Byrd, who fought a conflict near Antarctica and lost a lot of men, claiming that there were flying discs, flying saucers coming out of the Antarctica, and just there's all kinds of evidence that is legitimate evidence that clearly seems to show that the Antarctica is certainly a base of some sort. The Germans also, under Adolf Hitler, had a base down at Antarctica. There's all kinds of things that are going on in this region of the world. As you can see on your screen now, this is the book of Enoch. I was reading in the first book of Enoch, chapter 18, and this is where the angel Uriel is taking Enoch and showing him some very interesting things. We go down to say verse 4 and begin there. It says, "And I saw the winds which turned the sky and caused the disk of the sun and all the stars to set. And I saw the winds on the earth which support the clouds. And I saw the path of the angels. I saw at the end of the earth the firmament of heaven above. And I went towards the south." Okay, so he goes to the end of the earth. And he speaks about going towards the south. "And it was burning day and night, where there were 7 mountains of precious stones, and 3 towards the east and 3 towards the south."
Enoch was the great-great-grandfather of Noah, the 7th generation of humans after Adam. He played an intermediary role between the fallen angels that had rebelled against the Lord and the righteous angels who served and did the Creator's bidding. angels totaling 200 descended from the heavens and took women of their choosing, interbreeding with them and giving birth to a race of giant humanoids known as the Nephilim. The corrupted angels further taught humanity various tricks and crafts, and soon the earth became reddened from the blood of its creatures. War broke loose, and the natural order of things came to an end. And Azazel taught men to make swords, and knives, and shields, and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth, and the art of working them, and bracelets, and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways. Semyaza taught enchantments, and root cuttings, Armaros the resolving of enchantments, Baragial taught astrology, Kokabel the constellations, Ezekiel the knowledge of the clouds, Aragiel the signs of the earth, Shamsiel the signs of the sun, and Sariel the course of the moon. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. This episode in human history culminated with a heavenly battle. Righteous angels fought against the corrupted ones, and the latter were defeated. As punishment, the Lord had cast them away in Tartarus, and there is reason to believe this prison is located somewhere in Antarctica. Due to the successful role Enoch played in this conflict, together with his untainted nature, the Creator spared him of his earthly demise and took him directly into the heavens to witness the forthcoming events. Enoch's words are very suggestive, hinting at Antarctica as the spot where the corrupt angels were confined. And I saw the wind on the earth which supports the clouds, and I saw the path of the angels. I saw at the end of the earth the firmament of heaven above, and I went towards the south, and it was burning day and night, where there were 7 mountains of precious stones, 3 towards the east, and 3 towards the south. And those towards the east were of colored stone, and one was of pearl, and one of healing stone, and those towards the south of red stone, and the middle one reached to heaven, like the throne of the Lord, of stibium, and the top of the throne was of sapphire. The second passage describes Enoch's journey south, where he witnessed a curious phenomenon where the sky was burning day and night. This could be interpreted as the southern hemisphere summer season in Antarctica, where there is daylight for 24 hours. The burning sky phenomenon refers to the aurora australis, or the southern lights, which are visible from high southern latitudes in Antarctica, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, and Argentina. Regarding the 7 mountains, Mount Vinson qualifies as the central mountain described by Enoch, as it is the highest in Antarctica. It does indeed have 6 other adjacent peaks, but they don't match the alignment depicted unless we shift Earth's axis of rotation. The pole shift hypothesis speaks of rapid shifts in the relative positions of the modern-day geographic locations of the poles, and the axis of rotation of the Earth, thus triggering calamities such as floods and tectonic events. According to the research conducted by Sir Charles Hapgood, such brisk changes were a common occurrence in Earth's history, and proposes that the last pole shift had happened about 11,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. Was this the time when the biblical deluge took place? Was Antarctica transformed from a habitable land into a frozen, inhospitable desert of ice as a result of this pole shift? Were the corrupt angels imprisoned at the summit of the iconic Mount Vinson in the Antarctic Sentinel Range? Or maybe where the Wilkes Land anomaly is located? It is still unclear based on the above clues, but dots are slowly joining. The locations of the above-mentioned sites don't overlap, but they both present a veritable riddle awaiting to be solved. From what we know from the Book of Enoch, the angels are still alive and struggling someplace underground until the time of the redemption. The Book of Enoch further reads, "And like a spirit questioning me, the angel said, 'This is the place of the end of heaven and earth. This is the prison for the stars of heaven and the host of heaven. And the stars which roll over the fire, these are the ones which transgressed the command of the Lord from the beginning of their rising, because they did not come out at their proper times. And he was angry with them, and bound them until the time of the consummation of their sin, in the year of mystery." With this last passage in mind, it could be that Antarctica's riddles are too complex to unfold, and are instead awaiting this mystery year to arrive. Its frozen prisoners shall return to this land to wash their sins in the battle with the evil that is to come.
We also have a couple of other short videos tonight, and we finish up with an estimate in terms of years. It brings us out to 153 generations since Adam, as 153 is the number we find in John 21 in relation to the nations of the world and the generations of mankind. Given that Jesus stands at the center of human history, and he was born into the 77th generation from Adam, it follows, if we're trying to make a sum of 153, that there must be 76 more generations until his return. The sum of 77 and 76 is, of course, 153. And 153 is also the number of fish caught in John 21. The message appears to be that the 153rd generation of mankind will witness the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, British Israelite chronologists have already stated their belief that Queen Elizabeth II is already the 153rd generation in Adam in the genealogy and bloodline that they trace for her. So certainly we seem to be very much in the days of the 153rd generation. So let's make a start proper to this study, which is session 33, Giants, part 6. Giants reappear after the flood, but how? So we'll start again with accounts of giants in ancient histories. We're going to fill in some of the gaps that we sort of haven't done yet. Now, Philostratus was a Greek historian and trying to tell the history of his own people. And he describes some of the ancient Greek heroes and the giants in his history, and he says the giants range from 15 to 54 feet in height. So the largest he knew about was 54 feet, which is truly enormous. And we talk about the 36-foot giants, but this is heading in the direction of doubling that. The wine dresser character in Philostratus the Athenian's Heroicus story tells us what is supposed to be a factual story when he says that during one discovery they poured 2 amphorae of wine, and an amphora is quite large, into the skull of one of the giants, and yet it was still not full. So we're talking about a skull that holds this kind of volume. The Greek hero Orestes was reported to be 11.5 feet tall. Roman Emperor Maximian, full name Marcus Aurelius Valerius Maximianus, was just over 8 feet tall in the Roman times. Saint Nicholas, better known as Father Christmas, was well over 7 feet tall, which may surprise some of us. There are Greek and Roman civil records of individuals who were imported into Rome after being captured, I guess, in war, who stood 10 feet or more in height. So we see that people on the range 8 to 10 feet were still quite common, even in Roman times. Kircher, historian, speaks of the perfect skeleton of a giant, which was removed from a stone sepulchre near Rome in the reign of Emperor Henry II. And by an inscription attached to that sepulchre, it was known to be the skeleton of Pallas, who in legend was slain by Turnus. Now, this skeleton was found to be higher than the walls of the city. Saxo the grammarian relates that and this picture in the background sort of gives you an idea of relative sizes of these characters compared to modern man. But Saxo the grammarian relates that the giant Hartabenumph was 13.5 feet high, and that he had 12 companions, all of whom were 28 feet in height. Now, the character we see in the background here is probably about 15 feet high, so we can double him again to find out what it looks like to have a 28-foot giant. The French nobleman Scory, in his journey to the peak of Tenerife, says that they found in one of the caves of that mountain the head of a mummy, which had 80 teeth. And normally I think we have 24, is that right? And that the body was not less than 15 feet long. The 16th century anatomist Rivian, who spent his spare time dissecting human bodies collected from graveyards and executions, like what this is the genius's name, Leonardo da Vinci used to do this, didn't he? He used to get bodies, get them back from the morgue or the graveyards if they've been recently buried. Had someone dig them up, and you go through them at night time as well for his personal anatomy classes. Anyway, Rivian claimed in 1614 that in the suburbs of Saint-Germain there was a tomb holding the bones of a giant called Isouret, and that the height of this giant was 20 feet. At Rouen in France, in the year 1509, while digging ditches, the remains of a giant were reportedly found in a tomb, whose shin bone alone reached to the top of the girdle of every man there, making these shin bones about 4 feet tall, corresponding to a man who overall would have been 17 to 18 foot tall. There was reportedly an inscription on a copper plate affixed to the tomb, which read, "In this tomb lies the noble and puissant lord, the Chevalier Rouen de Valmont, and his bones." Chevalier, I think, is a knight or a horse rider, but I think probably knight would be the closest translation. So I wouldn't like to be the horse that had to carry him, of course, nor the person who faced him in battle. Near Marjariao in Sicily, in 1516, was found a giant 30 feet high. And here we have what looks like a legendary picture in the background, but that is what a giant about 30 feet high would look like. If the people there are 6 feet, in fact, that's only a 24 or 25 foot high giant, but that's getting there anyway. His head was the size of a hog's head. We know that hogs have very big heads, and each of his teeth weighed 5 ounces. The skeleton found in a riverbank not too far from Calcutta, India, measured 31 feet. The leg bones alone were reported as measuring 10 feet. And this was reported in the Newcastle PA News, August the 9th, 1934. Near Palermo in the valley of Megara in Sicily, the skeleton of a giant 30 foot long was found in the year 1545, and another 33 feet high in 1550. There's quite a few of these very large giants found along the Mediterranean coast, actually, which is where the giants initially fled after they left Israel, and perhaps waited for a few hundred years to see whether they could go back or not, before a second migration took them to the Americas. But certainly in that time they seem to have only increased in size. Now it's possible, however, that these remains come from a pre-flood period, before the time of Joshua and those giants that were scattered out of Israel, so that these were then the giants that occurred before Noah and his flood came along, when they were indeed of this size. Several of the gigantic bones of the latter subject are still preserved by private persons in Italy, according to the Altoona Mirror in May of 1905. That is at least the claim made by those who report the story in Italy. A number of museums of Europe perhaps still have in their basements or warehouses huge suits of armour and or double-handed swords and other implements of war that might serve to support stories of giant swordsmen. A lot of this is actually being taken out of public sight to not feed the narrative that giants were there, because it does clash with the idea of the evolutionist theories of the way that modern man has come from human ape precursors or human chimpanzee precursors, and developed as a hominid, etc. This whole appearance of giants is not explained in that theory. So sometimes these things have been hidden away from sight until better explanations perhaps have come out that might allow for them, so that these things can be put back on public sight. But certainly these things have been reported, and these bones have all been taken somewhere. If they're not in public museums, they're probably in private collections. In the case of the Smithsonian, we learnt some of them have been dumped over the board of ships and just thrown into the ocean. Now, the other evidence we had was about giant footprints, and we've had a look at one famous one, but there are at least 4 or 5 places around the world where you have these giant human footprints. Now, the mature person's footprint has a length that's about 15% of the person's height. So if we have the length of the footprint, we also have a pretty good idea of the height of the person. So this gives us, this allows us to state the approximate height of a giant from its footprint. The basic sort of way to do it is take the length of the footprint and multiply by 6.6. Back in 1924, Samuel Hubbard, leading the Dehenny expedition to the Grand Canyon, along with Dr. Gilmore, an eminent paleontologist of the era, discovered human footprints that were 20 inches in length, along with those of extinct mammals and reptiles. The human footprints, if they were 20 inches in length, speak of an individual whose height was about 11 foot. And you could do the math yourself. It's 132 inches, is it? So that's exactly 11 feet, isn't it? Hubbard also showed Dr. Gilmore 3 petrified human giants ranging in size from 15 to 18 feet. They reportedly also took photographs of their find, and one can read a full account at a website which I have in the notes and on the screen. Now, you see in the picture there's another one of those famous footprints. It's not the one in South Africa, and you can see from the size of it that compared to that man's foot, that you could probably say it was 6 or 7 times longer than his foot, that footprint there. It's quite broad across the base, possibly a heavier individual, perhaps than a man, and he would have to be, say, nearly 40 feet tall if that were the case, if it's going to be 7 times bigger than the average modern footprint. Or maybe if the average person is less than 6 feet, then maybe he'd be closer to 35 feet tall. But anyway, certainly significantly a large sort of a character. At Mission San Jose, as reported in the Oakland Tribune on September the 19th, 1926, human footprints measuring 5 feet in length, and even one measuring 10 feet in length, were found on a cliff face. The cliff face was once the beach. The print indicates a man some 33 feet in height. In the same era, dragonflies, lizards, birds, and animals of all kinds were also gigantic. And Dr. Louis Leakey at Olduvai Gorge had excavated dozens of fossils of giant animals, as well as finding some of those bones of the first hominids, purportedly. So we know that there wasn't just giant humans there, but there was also giant animals, and we've sort of had a discussion before about where these might have come from, according to the ancient religious texts at least. One scientist noted, while investigating ancient tombs of Paris, that the skulls of men living only 1,000 years ago were so much more robust than those of men today. Now, he didn't have to dig up the graves because the city planners dug up a lot of the graveyards at that time and just stored the bones in, large vaults, and also sometimes the churches actually took the bones and did strange things with them. Sometimes they built whole churches and buildings out of these bones just as a way of remembering the people that were in the graveyards. They didn't destroy the bones or anything. They tended to treat them with enough respect to sort of keep them. And sometimes they stayed in like this for a while until another place was found to locate them. But in the meantime, those who wanted to research them had the opportunity of doing so. So these skulls then that were discovered in Paris were found to be more robust than those of people today, and the skulls in the Paris catacombs were also in general larger than modern skulls, according to a report in the Fort Wayne Sentinel on June the 9th of 1900. So we're going to look at a couple of videos here. One of them is entitled "Over 1,000 Giant Digs Have Been Found in Recent Years," and another is called "Angels in the Euphrates," and I hope you'll enjoy these as well. So let's go there now.
we would come back to the base and we started hearing this rumor about a unit that killed what they started calling this really tall person. At first I didn't think anything of it, and then come to find out that the person that they killed actually was 3 times the size of a man, had extra digits on their hand and digits on their feet, and had red hair, and a special unit had come in and wanted this target.
You were in Afghanistan in 2002, and you were called into a very remote section of Afghanistan because a patrol had basically gone missing.
Exactly.
Okay, and there's no villages around
nothing
for miles.
Right.
So it's very remote.
Yeah, very remote. So we flew in to about 4 kilometers. We're hiking through the same area where they were supposed to make one of their checkpoints, one of their rally points. And before we left, there was all kinds of what happened with the ambush, but that was even odd because at the point of ambush, we would call for maybe close air support, something, okay? There was no calls made, we just off the grid. So we're coming down a mountainside, and it was a nice path, a goat path. As we bent around this corner, you could see this opening of the cave. There's a cave as we're coming around. And then I see there's a lot of rocks, which is another oddity, and then bone matter. When I'm not close enough to identify what kind of bones, but I did see something I knew was a piece of our communications equipment. So instantly, we're thinking ambush, maybe animal, it could be anything. And there was enough room in front of this cave, but it had a sheer drop-off. But there was enough room that we actually got into a decent dispersal in case of ambush.
You see something coming out of the cave, and it's moving with a speed and agility that catches you off guard. Everybody.
And he comes out. It was a man at least 12 to 15 feet. This is a monster. Red beard, and his hair was long past the shoulder. A scarlet red, and Dan runs at him and starts shooting, which broke all of us into the reality. Because it was so real.
Now your training is kicking in.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Muscle memory. Complete muscle memory. While Dan is moving at him, another bro of mine's laying down fire, and I start firing. He skewers Dan. He's now got him on this pike. It went through him. He's still got him, and he's coming after more. We all just clicked in. I don't know what it was, but I remember we're all like, shoot him in the face, shoot him in the face. And our weapons components were in force. We had 308s, and we had Barrett 50s. This is sounding longer than it took. We're talking 30 seconds. And he's taking multiple hits, and is still moving.
He talked about this giant being 1,100 pounds, anywhere from 10 to 15 feet long, and it was killed. It was apparently shot somewhere in a cave in Afghanistan, but before it was shot, it lunged at several of our troops, our soldiers. It may have even gorged somebody. It was just a bizarre story, and it just sounds like the Nephilim from the Bible. And you have to assume that the giant is not alone, that the giant is not the only being living on this planet. There's got to be a whole school of them somewhere. Maybe he's got a female mate. Maybe he's got children. Who knows? Unfortunate that he had to attack our soldiers rather than be somewhat peaceful, but I guess that comes with the territory.
Dan was dead. Okay. And Wyatt is a good man, probably one of the best men I know, now dead. Before I'd left, they were already starting what they call a 9-line, which is a medevac request. They're sending out a medevac request, then all of a sudden it's not a medevac request. All of a sudden we had a helicopter show up because, like I told you, it was a large precipice and a sheer drop. So the helicopter just came up from the drop. They had dropped netting, which is like cargo netting. It's like squares. We were told we had to bundle him up. and we get another bigger helicopter, but it's almost like a Jolly Green Giant used to look back in the day, that could get, through this area. Because the mountains, you got to remember, Chinooks could only go in certain places because they had enough lift. And so we got him on there. The thing was too big. We couldn't move it. It smelled worse than a skunk. A corpse that's been around for a while.
Really fell.
Oh, it was like a combination because of the, how do you put that, the persistence of a skunk smell. But once the helicopter came in, dropped its little hook, and off he goes. The communication was sent out that we had a very large possible human creature.
There you are in the hills of Afghanistan. How many troop members are you with?
We had 6 on my crew. When you say hills of Afghanistan, for us, we did not fly into the wilderness. We actually flew into a base. I guess this thing was transloaded out of the mountains by a CH-47. But I could see that it did have the 6 fingers. I remember taking my foot up and placing it up next to its foot, and it was extremely large. We estimated at about 12 feet, give or take. What I can tell you is the weight of the thing. Basically, it was approximately 1,500 pounds when it was getting on the aircraft. Now, if you take away the pallet weight and all the rigging that we had to hold this thing down, we figured it was around 1,100 pounds.
Of course we're upset. That's a given. Okay? We lost a very good guy. But add to that, you're discussing something that even in our after-action report, they're saying rewrite it. And we had to rewrite it the way they wanted.
How many fingers?
6. Oh, 6.
Six
and 6
fingers.
toes.
6 toes.
And the nails were weird because if you see somebody that ever has, I don't know what it's called, but it's
Like a fungus on
the nails, how they get pointy and they're like gnarly. That's what they look like.
As we showed you in the clip, the radio operator checked in and gave the report, and the unit was told to stand by as Central Command was about to dispatch 2 helicopters to them. They were told that the Giant would be loaded on one of the choppers, and then they would follow in the other chopper for debriefing. The shooter told us that when the chopper landed, they loaded the Giant into a very large cargo net. The first chopper towing a Giant left, and then they boarded the second helicopter and followed. When they returned to their base in the Kandahar province in Afghanistan, they were debriefed and told to keep all of this under wraps. They were forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which essentially would prohibit them from talking about this to anyone. It is with great reluctance on the shooter's part that he has come forward. He believes that people have the right to know what is going on this planet, that the supernatural is real, and that the startling and unsettling fact that a remnant of a legendary Nephilim are still on the earth may be true. While the shooter's story is certainly fantastic, it does corroborate Stephen Quayle's account that he published years before. And people have a right to know about this stuff. I mean, if there are 15-footers or 18-footers roaming the planet and our military has brought them down, I mean, we have a right as American citizens. I mean, this isn't classified military stuff. This is something that we need to know, and it points back to the biblical prophetic narrative. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, here's my personal opinion. My personal opinion is if it points that the Bible is accurate, they don't want it. If it goes against Darwinian evolution, it's not to be spoken of.
So you're out in the boonies running around looking for high-value targets?
Correct. Okay. And we're doing those operations, and as we're getting into firefights, we're getting into different scrimmages, you want to put it that way, we would come back to the base, and we started hearing this rumor about a unit that killed this, what they started calling this really tall person. At first, I didn't think anything of it. And then come to find out that the person that they killed actually was 3 times the size of a man, had extra digits on their hand and digits on their feet, and had red hair. And a special unit had come in and wanted this target. Well, we'd heard that they had killed this thing inside a cave, or the mouth of a cave. And it was common knowledge among the military to hear this.
Now, when you say common knowledge, what do you mean? I mean, how does that work?
Years later, to come to find out, when I had returned from Afghanistan and had met other military members that had not been there in the operations with me, If you would bring up the giant of Kandahar, they knew about it. When you first hear it, you're thinking like, this has got to be a joke. This has got to be a hoax. And then after things go down a certain way and you keep hearing it, you start to realize it's not a joke. They kept telling us to keep our weapons high, which means normally it's 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, but they kept telling us to put it towards a man's head and put it higher. So we would question, why do they want us to shoot higher than a man's head?
That's bizarre.
It is.
Our contact said 2002 is when they shot this 15-footer or taller, and you're now in this, in the service around 2005. This word has gotten out, and what I find interesting here too is that if you're going to create a hoax, I get that, but you got details: 6 fingers, red hair, double rows of teeth, 6 digits on the toes, and of course that brings it right back into what we hear about in the biblical prophetic narrative, specifically the Nephilim. Your thoughts?
I agree. I would tell you that when I was doing my time in the service, and the stuff I saw, some of it I couldn't explain, like lights in the sky during firefights, like orbs or lights that be the size of a softball that look that size looking up in the sky but making weird noises. And even going to Iraq myself and being near Haditha Dam and seeing the prisoners underneath the dam, and the prisoners would scream and there'd be this awful feeling underneath the dam, and then later finding out in the Bible that an angel's locked underneath there, where it talks about.
And this Haditha Dam is the Euphrates.
Is Euphrates,
and there's
correct.
an angel supposedly locked underneath the Euphrates,
correct,
which is released in the book of Revelation.
Correct.
That's bizarre. So you're actually at this site, and soldiers are being locked in prison underneath the Haditha Dam,
correct,
and they're freaking out.
They're freaking out. They said they could feel it. In fact, the people who would guard them would draw straws to see who would actually take them.
No one wanted to go down.
Nobody wants to go down. Going back to Afghanistan, we would hear these things. We would hear the locals talk about rumors of these giants.
What would the locals say? How would they talk about it?
They say that they lived in the caves and they would eat people, and
they were cannibals.
They were cannibals.
In general, evidence suggests that men are getting smaller and weaker with each century, and longevity is decreasing or has perhaps sort of leveled out in the modern times. Some estimates give the present rate of degeneration of the human genome at nearly 1% per century. So there may be some giants living among us even now that we don't know about, but certainly the military seem to have stumbled on some in, for instance, Afghanistan. The Solomon Islands, it's still believed that there are giants there in the jungle who were encountered by the Japanese during the war, who apparently ate the Japanese they caught. And here we have a little video again, which shows sort of military parades in North Korea, and it seems to be that they have a few giants standing there amongst their ranks as well. Let's have a quick look at that. Now, we're currently in about the 153rd generation after Adam. We mentioned this before. Now, Christ was the 77th in descent from Adam if we use the genealogy in Luke chapter 3. And the 153 was a special number to the Greeks, and so it was quite interesting that if we go from 1 to 153 and put the numbers in order, the middle number in the list is 77. That means there are 76 generations before it and 76 generations after it. Of course, the 7 is significant in Scripture anyway, and the more so 77 being the middle number in that sequence. Now, the question I suppose we have then is, if Christ was the 77th generation from Adam, and there are 76 more generations to make up the 153, how long does 76 generations take? And of course, we know that as people live for shorter and shorter periods, each generation is probably a little bit shorter than the one before. I mean, the generation in the times of Adam and Eve may have been 100 or so years before they had their children. By the time of, even Abraham, he had his son when he was sort of 100. But 40, 60, those sort of ages in the Old Testament. I suppose by the time of Jesus, men would have been, say, 30 when they were having their children, something like that. Today, it could be 20. So we have to make an estimate, really, of what 76 generations might look like. But we have an average figure we could use. So if we were going to go 76 times 25 years for each generation, we'd come up with 1900 years. We'd have to add the lifetime of Jesus into that list. Now, Jesus died at 33 without children, of course, but we're counting from 33 AD roughly, well, 28 in my reckoning. So this would make it 1928 there, if it was 25-year generations. But if a generation were 30 years in length, we'd be talking about the 153 generations ending at about 2300 AD. So somewhere between 1930 and 2300 would be when the 76th generation would appear. And obviously in the year 2000, 2010 or 20, we know that we're sort of right in the middle of that set of estimates between 25 and 30 years per generation. So we can say that we are certainly roughly at about the 76th generation after Christ, which is the 153rd generation after Adam, and therefore we are in significant times, the times that will see the return probably of Jesus Christ and the day of judgment that the Old Testament speaks of. Now, 153 is a special number in the Bible, and that's a whole study in its own right, which we've touched on, I think, before, and if not, it's coming up in a study coming up. It has to do with the cube roots of digits of numbers, and 153 is one of those one or two numbers between 0 and 1000 that has a peculiar property of all numbers converging to it. It's also the number that recurs in John 21 in the story of the fish and the net that hauls in the 153 great fish, and we have to sort of unpack that story through its number symbols to understand it. But the Greeks knew what this number meant. Now, so what can we summarize then from these sorts of little facts, these snippets that we've gained from the biblical text and from the findings of history, and even from the appearance of giants even in our own day? Well, it seems that we can fairly confidently say that we're virtually in history's final generation, give or take, maybe 1/2 generations maximum, with the rebirth of Israel as a nation. And if we interpret the words of Jesus to say that that generation that appears in the rebirth of the nation will not pass away before the Son of Man comes, we could argue that from 1948 out, there probably won't be more than 100 years. So therefore, we could expect all things to finish probably before about 2050, and probably a bit earlier than that. So we're certainly at the steps right on the doorstep of the end of all things, the fulfillment of Daniel 9's 70th week, which itself terminates in the second coming of Christ. So we're virtually in history's last generation. We can also say there's been a long-standing occult interest in reincarnating the bound spirits of the fallen angels and their demigod children, and the technology is right now available for people to do that should they wish to make that their goal. And that may in fact be going on in secret and we don't know about it. We believe that in some way giants will reappear in these last days, whether they come out of sleep from stasis or whether they're retroviruses are used, for instance, with soldiers or the like, to turn them into sort of giant-sized super soldiers, or whether the DNA is used so that from giant remains to clone and reproduce these giants in the modern age, like a Jurassic Park type experiment, or whether whether these are being produced off-world even to bring back at the last age for the last great battle, whatever the reason is. But these giants are out there somewhere and probably will reappear briefly in the last days, just as they were running around in the world in the times of Noah. Before Christ returns, these spirits will be released from their sort of prison for a short time, and it looks like the fifth apocalyptic trumpet could be when that happens, because an angel appears with that trumpet who then opens the abyss, and it allows great clouds and swarms of demonic powers to emerge from the abyss. And you can well imagine that demons that were bound there and also fallen angels at this point will be allowed out, and this same swarm of demons will support and empower and drive the great lie that then propagates with the simultaneous appearance of the Antichrist, the last of the Antichrists. Paul calls this last great character the man of sin, the lawless one. The release of these ancient rebellious spirits is nevertheless likened to prisoners who are being led in chains from their subterranean jail to the place of their final execution. So even though it will be a very violent time, from God's point of view, they're just being led out on public display for a while before they're finally destroyed. In fact, we're going to just see their evil manifest so clearly that everybody can see why it is that they need to be judged and destroyed. Now, next week we're going to start on a new topic, which is going to be the New World Order. And that series is going to run for perhaps 3 sessions. And plenty of new stuff again. We're bringing ourselves back into the modern day again, and so changing tack once again. So we'll meet you there next week again, I hope, and I hope you're enjoying the series so far. We're skirting in and out of the actual book of Revelation, and some of you may be wondering when I'm going to sit more solidly in the book, but I think this background knowledge, and it does give us quite a context. It does give us the context in which many ancient ideas were formed, and in which many ancient interpretations, even of prophecy, would have been linked to these race memories and the belief that these things really were part of human history. And people would have tried to see the significance of the revelation in terms of the significance of past events. So I hope it is useful to us all to learn all these things. And we'll see you all again next week. I hope you have a great week until then, and I look forward to seeing you again. Until then, bye-bye.